What's up? Thank you for joining us again for another episode of the Light Pod. I am your host, Pastor Ronald Devon Riley Sr., and I'm here with my beautiful co-host,
Co-pastor Amber Riley.
How are you today?
I'm good.
It is December 14th.
Yes.
We're preparing for Christmas. You ready?
No.
You got your list together?
No.
Do you know what you're getting me?
No.
Do I know what I'm getting you?
I don't know. You asked me about something, and I said that would be fine. I don't know if you remember what that is.
I don't. Remind me after this. But so today's podcast is centered around the power of agreement.
Okay.
All right. Agreements with friends, agreements with your jobs, agreements with people outside of your circle, agreements, period.
Yeah.
The power of agreements. And particularly when I think about agreements, I think about covenant relationships and the fact that God is a covenant-keeping God. What, from a therapist standpoint, can you give me when it comes about the importance of agreements and centered around maybe what's your thoughts about even the Abrahamic covenant with God? Can you go into that?
I can.
And particularly, let me, because that's probably like setting you up.
Yeah.
So when we talk, talk to me about.
Like I didn't study that.
No.
But it's okay.
Talk to me about covenant relationships in general, because I recall there was some time that you shed some light on Old Testament covenants and how blood had to be shed. Right? Is that an alley hoop?
Yeah.
All right, talk to me. Talk to me about what is the importance of covenant, and from an Old Testament standpoint, and then also the power of covenant with us today.
Okay. As far as the Old Testament, and I'm pretty sure that I may have been talking about it in regard to how serious or how sacred marriage is taken in the time that we're in today.
Yeah.
And people seem to think like marriage is just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And it's much, much deeper than that. It is a covenant, and covenant is bigger than a promise. It's not even like a bonding. It's like a fusion to where not that we lose all of my components and what I'm made of and then what you're made of, but we take all of those components and we come together.
Yeah.
And form something new. Where scientifically, it can't be undone. And that's how we should take on marriage. And so with Abraham, God, and I can't tell you exactly the scripture, but God gave him specific instructions.
Yeah.
When God wanted to get into covenant with him, he had to cut certain animals, split them down the middle, and lay them on, like, say there was a path right here, and one side of the animal was on this side and another side of the animal was on this side.
Yeah.
And the way that they completed the covenant back then is that the people who were coming in covenant together, they would do this practice, and then they would walk the path in between the split animals, in essence saying that if I break this covenant with you, may this happen to me.
Ooh, that's deep.
Yeah.
That's deep.
And so the thing with Abraham was that Abraham wasn't even awake to make this covenant. It was so important to God that he showed up as a flame and he walked the path that Abraham had laid with the animals, and God sealed the covenant. And Abraham wasn't even awake.
That's deep. God and his covenants, they are like, they come with terms and conditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like anything when we go into, even when you sign the saying that you're going to work at a specific place, that's a contract.
Mm-hmm.
In general, when we think about contracts, contracts sometimes are made, but there's no relationship involved.
Right.
You know, so some agreements, they can be made and you don't have to necessarily like this person.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to know this person.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that one flaw of us making covenants or agreements with people, the contract of it or the contractual parts of it, you can find so many things that are faulty. Whereas even if you, let's say, for instance, when you go into agreement with somebody and this person's character is not really fitting like yours, or there's some things that are iffy about this person, yet you knew it was iffy, but then you still sign that contract. And then because you go into this binding agreement, when things get rocky, let's say that person knew things were going to get rocky because they knew they had character flaws. So then they put words on theirs that can be kind of ambiguous to where the language of the contract was not understood. You get into risk mitigation, things like that. So then you're like, oh, shoot, this was a faulty contract because I didn't know if I did this would now give you all the power to do X, Y, and Z. And that, when you think about it, can somewhat be, not saying that the Old Testament or the Ten Commandments was faulty, but God knew that we couldn't keep all those commandments. Like there's so much. Like we know the 10, but I want to say there's like 166. So there's all these commandments and all these agreements that we could not keep. Children of Israel, they were struggling, right?
Yes.
Even with the basic ones, do not kill, people still murder today. So there's different things that through grace, through God's mercy, that the new covenant, God brings that in and he makes it as simple as possible. But when you're thinking about the Old Testament agreements and the Old Testament covenants, the only surety that we have is that God is the covenant keeping God, and he keeps his word. He keeps his word. So moving on, what in your mind?
I want to add, because there are people that will say, see, none of those laws back there matter anymore.
Oh, they still matter. Jesus says not one jot would it's not verbatim, but he pretty much says, I didn't come to abolish the law.
Right.
What Jesus did was summed it up into 3. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And if we do those things, it takes care of the rest of those things. Those are still good rules to abide by. They're still good. But yeah, summing them up in those 3, if we follow those 3, we naturally do what's in the rest of them. So
yeah. So how important is it for people to understand who their friends are and to understand, if they should agree with certain things or not?
I'm looking at the time. I'm like, that's agreement, especially in my line of work, is something that I talk about probably to every single person that I have in the day, because I'm trying to talk to someone to make them think a different way. And in order to think a different way, we have to deconstruct beliefs that they have built inside themselves. And the reason and the way that they got the belief is that they came into agreement with something.
Yeah, I like that.
Prior. So my expertise is systemic. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. So it's not that it's just I deal with just married people or I just deal with families. I have individual clients, but the issues that they come to therapy with, we end up looking at the system that created them. And so we talk a lot about what happened in childhood, because most of the issues that we have as adults come from something we actually came into
Childhood
agreement
trauma?
with.
Okay.
In childhood, it's trauma, and maybe something from that trauma caused us to agree with what that trauma told us about ourselves. Absent parents. Children see things so differently than what adults do. Adults, we think we can split a house and think we can love. This is on the good side. If there can be a good side of a divorce or, a broken home, that as long as we love the child enough, that it's going to be okay. But that child has no way to understand things like we do, even if it is a justified breakup, if it is, a relationship that really, really, really does need to be broken up. The child has no way to understand that. And so when there's an absence, there is a belief that they begin to take on about themselves of why this other parent isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not good enough. If I was good enough, then, daddy would have stayed, then mommy would have stayed. And they begin to behave from that belief. Kids start acting up in schools, their grades are affected. And then that carries into adulthood, into their adult relationships. Because they came into that agreement, not even realizing that that was what they were doing. They agreed that they're not good enough.
Man, so with that being said, how important is it when a family decides to split that the court system should see the value in therapy? Even so, like, because what you're saying is there was an agreement when this family got together. Then because of mutual agreements or all of this agreement, they both agreed that this would not work no more. Now, because as a result of that, the after effect of that decision is now the kids feel something. So now the kids experience this new environment to where they are open to the elements to even think that it's because of them. And if they were good enough, that's bad. If they had maybe, whatever, the parents would have stayed together. So now they're taking on a responsibility and a weight that has nothing to do with them. And what if I'm picking up what you put down, that follows them for the rest of their life. And
unless they realize they need help for it. And then, like those people may end up in my office and, we have to talk through that and they have to heal through that so that they can tear that belief down and finally realize that it's this. You hear it said all the time, the child that's inside of me believes this. And so it literally is that, like, but it's not what they have thought that to be all of their lives. They're not living their lives thinking the child in me, thinks I'm not good enough. No, it's just this anxiety that they have all the time in whatever they're doing. It doesn't even just have to be a relationship. It can be a job. I'm not good enough.
So how does one overcome? How does a grown man struggling with not being accepted his whole life come into agreement with himself that I am accepted, I am made in the image of God, I am worth it, I do have purpose? How does that translate?
And it's different for different people. The number one thing that we need to do is to go back and find that and see where that belief first came in so that they understand that that's where it's coming from. And a lot of people can be like, oh, wow. Okay, I know what that is now. It's not something that's happening right now. It's something that I've actually carried with me. I understand I'm not back there. I can't do anything about that anymore. How do I start from here and then not carry that with me? And so there's different ways to do that. I love when my clients are Christian or believe in the Bible, because then we can
take that trip,
go through there and, you know, start looking at everything that God has said about you.
Yeah.
And then there's an issue when I have clients that don't believe in the Bible. And so I get really sad within myself for them, because then it's hard to try to, and it's hard for the Christian too, because when you have that belief in yourself, it's a journey. You've carried it for this many years. And this is just how your body has reacted to things. And so it's a process to undo that, but at least there's hope. And for somebody who doesn't have that hope, then, you know, there's, you know, other things. I still try to take Bible strategies. I hate to say strip God from it, because I'm never stripping God from anything. I know what I'm doing. But they may not know exactly what I'm doing.
So let me ask you this, because this is bringing up something else. How important is it for people to know their family tree?
There's no other way to define the things that you may be going through, the thoughts that you have, the beliefs that you have about yourself, cycles that you see yourself going through. Knowing who your family is, and knowing, and this is just something that, you know, just in my studies and coming into being a therapist, having the knowledge that being in church all of my life, I've heard of generational curses. And I don't want to leave. I always say I don't want to leave out generational blessings, because there are good cycles. There are good patterns that you have in your families, and you want to keep those things going. But the things that we want to break, we need to know and identify that there has been a cycle, so we can know, well, you know, what has been done. And now that I want to break that, what do I need to do differently from what they did, so that I can get a different outcome, and now I can start something different from my line.
I love it, because, and I have to keep the guardrails on this conversation, because the questions that I have, when we talk about generational curses, I always explain, you know, what happened in our family, how, you know, the sins of the father revisited the generations, even as I repeated some sins of my father. But there is a key and there is a secret. The secret in this key of destroying generational curses, and it leads us back to this thing of agreements, because sometimes even American history, even African history, there's this thing where there are oaths that are made on altars that goes back to the blood. So there are times when people may experience things that they have no control of. For instance, in the Eastern cultures, a girl can be married off, not even knowing that she's married off until that time.
Yeah.
All right. There are things that happen in different generations to where a grandmother could have been, in some type of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say she made an oath with a spirit, and that oath was that you can have this generation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The reason why I bring that up is because whenever a person experiences certain cycles,
Mm-hmm.
they have to question, and this is going very spiritual, they have to question the power of their altar. Mm-hmm. Now, in our house, we have an altar sitting out there. On this altar, this is where God visits. I light incense as a priest of the house. I set our prayer requests there. I pray over them. And that agreement is between me and God.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times, and it shows in the Bible, that there are oaths made with different spirits that cause things to, go haywire in the bloodline, to where even in the present day, where you can see the sins repeated from generation after generation. And the cure that I've come to find out is to go to revisit that in the spirit realm. And you go to the court. This is probably going too deep. Like when you're dealing with the courts of heaven, and when you go and you make your petition, and you speak to the bloodlines and every agreement that was created by past generations. You now, by the blood of Jesus, which is the greatest, strongest power ever, to break and disannul those agreements. So even if people today are experiencing these things where they can't break cycle, they don't know why they're alcoholic, they don't know why they do X, Y, and Z, a lot of times it's because there was this agreement. And not only this, God told Adam and Eve, this was one of the second agreement in the Bible was, actually it might have been a third, but it was, I'm going to give you dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over all these things, right? And you're going to dwell in this place, but the day you eat of this tree, you will surely die.
Yeah.
Once they ate of that tree, and this is where I'm getting to, sin entered the world.
Right.
From that, every child that is born comes into the world a sinner. So there are consequences and repercussions to the decisions that we are still, every woman that is ever born who has a baby, who experiences the monthly cycle, who experiences a birth plan, you can equate that to the curse or the consequence of the agreement that was broken. So as we get ready to wrap this up, because I know that it took a kind of a deep, and we don't,
and
know,
I
maybe
feel like it only that word agreement is so deep.
Yeah,
it's very deep. And even as you were talking about Adam and Eve and in all of these things coming down, and genetically, not just spiritually, God, when he created everything, when I say he took care of everything, he took care of everything.
Took care of everything.
We are spiritual beings, and I'll probably say this a million times every time we have a conversation, because we're more spiritual than we are physical, but it doesn't seem like it, of course, because we live in this physical earth, and we have to have these physical bodies to function.
Yeah.
But spiritually, yes, there are things in the spirit that come at us or come at our family. We find certain things in our family lines that we see down through the generations. But like if you study, it's called epigenetics, that also we pass down trauma, we pass down emotional processes, we pass down anxiety, we pass down all of these things. They create tags on our DNA, and we pass them down to our children.
Gotta be careful.
And so, yes, every decision that we make it doesn't just affect you. Just, we were talking, I think, a couple of weeks ago about how our purpose and the things that we go through, even though it's us going through them, they have more to do with people who are assigned to our voice and people that we're assigned to help get through the things that we've been through. Sorry. But
water?
you got water. But it is, we need to understand that our decisions are also like that. Not just that we're going through things, but also the decisions that we make every day affect not just us. And in this culture right now, and I see it every day, and it upsets me so much, even when people come in my office every day, that we're such a selfish culture right now, that we don't think outside of ourselves. And it doesn't matter. Every decision that we make affects somebody else, somebody that we don't know. If I decide to run a red light, it affects so many other people that I don't even know, that I'll probably never see or meet in my life.
Wow.
And we just have to be careful to.
No, and I think that's important. I was thinking, I want to say this week that a lot of things that I'm going through now, I can physically see the decisions that I made last year and how it's affecting me now.
Yeah.
I can see the decisions that I made 5 years ago and how it's affecting me now. So how important, and we can wrap this up, how important is it to understand the decisions that we're making and the long-time effect that it can have? So for a person who's thinking about rushing into something, how important? You got something?
No, you just keep hitting these things, and it's like, ugh, like,
you know.
it goes back to God. God is the way that He created the earth. Like, Adam and Eve weren't the first living things that He created. He created the grass first. And, when you look at the grass and you look at the roots of the grass and how interconnected they are, he showed us through everything that He did, how He wanted us to be in that grass and those grass roots. And we think about people that like try to, they run for different causes in the community. They're called grassroots.
Yeah,
groups.
it's true.
Yeah, and so community, He wanted us to be community. He wanted us to be unified. And then He created the flowers. And so, the flowers, they're productive. They can, send off spores so they can grow other ones that are like them. And then He talks about the trees that, bear the fruit that has the seeds inside itself, and that represents legacy,
reproduction,
and so God is a God of legacy, and that's the way He designed us to what we were to produce. When He said be fruitful and multiply, it meant so many different things. Yes, literally be fruitful and multiply, create more people that look like us and they're doing what we do, so that they can then, grow up, do the same thing. And that's how we were going to spread God's kingdom. But also we are fruitful and multiply for the people that are just like doing this and having our podcast, and whoever listens to us, and, if they latch on and then, learn what we're talking about, and then they go teach somebody else. That's being fruitful and multiplying. But we also have to recognize that it also works the opposite way too. Yes, we're doing good things,
but you can also do bad things.
But you can do bad things, and it also is fruitful.
Yeah.
And multiplies.
Jesus says, He tells the Pharisees, there was some type of commotion, and He tells them, like, if you were of my seed, you would do good, but you are the seed of Satan. And there was 2 seeds identified in Genesis. I'm going to put enmity between thy seed, my seed, and thy seed, and he should be. So you have this dynamic of what you're talking about, and you have this legacy of identifying there are people who are actually serpent seed, and there are actual seeds who are the sons of God. Yeah. And it's important for us as sons of God, that has no gender type thing to it, is literally sons of God. It's important for us to watch the agreements that we make, both physical in both spiritually.
Yes.
All right, because there is outcomes, there are risk mitigations, there are things that come with contracts, and if you've made contracts and agreements with people that you need to break, even before we go into this new year, break them. Break the contracts, okay? Ask God to renew your strength. Ask God to forgive you. Depend on Him, lean on Him, and find out what He says about you. And I only want to be in agreements with God. And one of the parts of this scripture, Paul is telling us to be those who agree to walk with me. Let's be like-minded. Because if you're not like-minded, God's going to reveal it. He's going to reveal that we're not actually on the same page. Yeah. Then you got, I see, we're not really on the same page. So let's be in alignment. Let's be in agreement with God. Let's also look at the relationships that we have started. We have even things in agreement that we've been agreeing with about ourselves that is false. Let's void those contracts and let's I am who God says I am. And I agree with that. Agree with me. I love you. I need you to survive. Any last final words before we wrap this up?
Yes, I learned something this week.
What'd you learn?
It was talking about agreements, and it was saying worship is I worship when I agree with God about who He says He is. Okay. I come into my authority when I agree with who God says I am.
And apart from that, I am nothing. All right, good stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Leave us a comment if you will. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on TikTok. Go to the website. Do all that stuff. We are officially. Yeah. All right. It's been a good time. We are out.
Out.